everybody. Hello, everybody. The time is now 5:30 on September 18th, 2019, and this public meeting of the State Board of Education will come to order. The roll call will now be called to determine the presence of a quorum. Mr. Hayworth?
Dr. Gasoi. Dr. Gasoi. Mr. Jacobson.
Present.
President Wattenberg.
Present.
Dr. O'Leary.
Present.
Mr. Parker. Mr. Parker. Dr. Sutter.
Present.
Ms. Williams. Madam President, Ms. Williams indicated she will be absent today.
Okay.
Mr. Batchelor.
Present.
Ms. MacLeay.
Present.
Ms. Burton. Madam President, Ms. Burton will also be absent today.
Okay.
Mr. O'Sullivan.
Present.
Madam President, you have quorum.
A quorum has been determined, and the State Board will proceed now with the business portion of the meeting. Members, we have a draft agenda before us. Are there any corrections or additions? Seeing no changes, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion being properly moved and seconded, I will ask for the yes and nays. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed say nay. The motion is approved. Members, we have the minutes from our September 4th working session before us. Are there any corrections or additions? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
The motion being properly moved and seconded, I will ask for the yeas and nays. All in favor say aye.
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 Nays? The motion is approved. Hello, everybody. My name is Ruth Wattenberg. I'm the Ward 3 representative and the president of the State Board of Education. And I want to say it's nice to see all these faces in the audience. So many people watch on cable and on Periscope. We don't always see so many faces. So I love it and encourage other people to come down as well. On behalf of the members of the District of Columbia State Board of Ed, I want to welcome our guests and our viewing public to our Wednesday, September 18th public meeting. The board holds its regular scheduled meetings on the third Wednesday of every month here at the Old Council Chambers at 441 4th Street Northwest. In addition to broadcasting this meeting live via the District Knowledge Network, we are also live streaming via Periscope on Twitter, and the video for the meeting will be posted on our YouTube page at SBOE. I want to note that our next meeting, our next public meeting in October has been moved to October 23rd because many of our members will be traveling to the annual conference of the National Association of the State Boards of Education. The next official meeting of the State Board is our working session on October 2nd, 2019. Tonight we will be recognizing the start of National Hispanic Heritage Month on September 15th. We are glad to have representatives from many community organizations and schools that serve the district's Latinx population with us. We are also honoring Linda Ryden, a peace teacher at Lafayette Elementary School in Ward 4, and her work to develop a social and emotional learning program. We are honored to have four district science teachers who have been involved in the development of the new DC Science Assessment. They're going to be joining us tonight, and they will speak to us about their perspectives from the classroom and the development process. We look forward to their testimony and thank them for being here. The State Board will also be considering a number of administrative resolutions, including appointing a new chief student advocate, a resolution making recommendations for the mayor and council on ensuring that young men in the district register for the Selective Service System, and designating an official delegate for the NASBE annual conference. We'll also consider a resolution that creates committees to continue the work of the State Board on priorities set by the board in March and projects adopted in June. The State Board would also like to acknowledge that next week is National High School Voter Registration Week. High school voter registration is critical to our democracy. We encourage all high school students who will be 18 by Election Day to register to vote. Your voices matter, and I just want to say one of my very, very first jobs was as a voter registration organizer, so I really encourage all the high schools to do a great job at this, and everybody watching, make sure your kids register and that you register. At this time, I'd like to turn to our State Superintendent, Hansel Kang, for any comments.
Thank you, President Wattenberg. I'm glad to be back with you all for the September public meeting. In August, OSSE announced 2019 park results at the school, LEA, and statewide level. Some of you joined us for our public announcement at Whittier Educational Campus, and I know my team was able to provide a briefing on the results at your most recent working session. We were pleased to see that students in the district continued to show improvements in achievement for the 4th consecutive year. Gains in both English language arts and math show that more students in DC are on track for college and careers once they graduate from high school, and we are proud to see the continued steady progress in annual statewide assessments, with being up more than 12 points in English language arts and up more than 8 points in math since 2015 when students first began to take PARCC. I want to say that I know these percentage points can sometimes feel abstract, but what this translates to is actually more than 7,000 students being able to read on grade level and in a way that will prepare them for college than was true in 2015. More than 7,000 more students across the city. So this is real and meaningful progress, and there's huge kudos to be given to our students, our families, and our educators for the incredible hard work that they've been doing. Schools have received individual student reports and should be distributing them to families. So we encourage families to follow up with their schools if they've not yet received their score reports. You can also find a suite of resources to help students, parents, and educators understand the assessment and the results on the OSSE website. The 2019 PARCC results will also be included on the DC School Report Card when the second year of the report card is released later this fall. Continuing the theme of assessments, again, I too am excited to have a panel of teachers who have been involved in helping us create the new DC Science Assessment who are with us this evening. The Every Student Succeeds Act at the federal level requires states to set challenging academic standards in science and also to assess in science at least once in grades 3 to 5, grades 6 to 9, and grades 10 to 12. The DC Science Assessment is administered in grades 5, 8, and high school biology, it was administered for the first time this past spring. The DC Science Assessment has been developed in partnership with local educators, with educators involved in a number of stages of assessment implementation at key points, including in test design, item content, bias and sensitivity reviews, and range finding. Most recently, OSSE held performance level setting meetings in September, and we were so pleased to be joined by representatives from the State Board of Education staff, and I hope that they found this informative, and we look forward to further discussions with this board. During the September panel, educators had the opportunity to engage with one another about student work and collectively use their judgment to define the performance levels that we will use on the new science assessment. Based on the feedback from educators, we will be presenting final achievement cut scores for DC Science at the upcoming State Board working session on October 2nd for your consideration, and we will seek approval of those scores at the October public session. And I look forward to hearing more from our educators as well. And finally, I would like to invite all of the members of the State Board and the public who are listening to attend OSSE's annual DC Parent and Family Engagement Summit. This event, which is planned by DC parents for DC parents, provides important information on academic services and supports available for students and families. Sessions include topics on accessing early childhood education, preparing for post-secondary education, and practical strategies to combat truancy. It's also a great event to give parents the opportunity to engage with one another, but also with LEA leaders and practitioners. This year's event will be held on September 28th, next Saturday, from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Walter E. Washington Convention Center. I hope you all will attend and consider sharing this information with your constituents. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you this evening, and I look forward to our continued work together in this school year.
Thank you very much. Tonight we're going to start with our ceremonial resolutions. We have two. We use ceremonial resolutions to recognize and honor people, schools, or items of note. After considering both resolutions, the State Board will take a short recess to present the resolutions to our guests. Our first resolution honors the celebration of National Hispanic Heritage Month from September 15 through October 15. The district has a vibrant Hispanic and Latinx community, and the State Board is pleased to join them in recognizing the unique contributions of their community to the city and the nation. I'd like to turn to our Ward 1 colleague, Dr. Emily Gasoi, for the motion.
So moved.
Dr. O'Leary, would you like to second? Okay. The motion having been properly moved and seconded, Mr. Hayworth, will you read the resolution into the record?
State Board of Education Ceremonial Resolution celebrating National Hispanic Heritage Month, CR 19-19. Whereas the United States observes National Hispanic Heritage Month each year from September 15th to October 15th, continuing a tradition that began in 1968 under President Lyndon B. Johnson as Hispanic Heritage Week and was expanded by President Ronald Reagan in 1988. Whereas the purpose of National Hispanic Heritage Month is to celebrate the culture and history of Americans whose ancestors came to the United States from Spain, Mexico, and Latin America. Whereas more than 75,000 District of Columbia residents claim Hispanic or Latinx heritage, according to the most recent estimates from the United States Census Bureau, whereas nearly 18,000 of the district's students are Hispanic or Latinx, and whereas National Hispanic Heritage Month will be commemorated this year in district schools and neighborhoods with events, festivals, programs, and activities. Now therefore be it resolved that the DC State Board of Education recognizes and celebrates National Hispanic Heritage Month and the achievement and contributions of the district's residents of Hispanic and Latinx ancestry. Be it further resolved that the State Board recognizes and values the importance of culturally relevant pedagogy, man, that word is always hard for me, sorry, dual language immersion programs and bilingual methods of instruction as important elements of equity and excellence in education.
The motion having been properly moved, thank you. Is there any discussion on the resolution?
I would like to say a few words. First of all, I would like to thank all of the educators and advocates and activists who are here to help us to celebrate our Hispanic community and all the contributions that they've made to our city. Thank you so much for your the support, the advocacy, the education, the opportunities that you have been providing for the Hispanic community in DC for many, many, many years. We're thrilled to have you here with us. Thank you.
I'd also like to welcome Dr. Leonel Popo from Cardozo High School, who's a legend at Cardozo and has been representing us for not quite as long as I did, but almost as long. Just to have him here to help us celebrate something which will be very interesting to see if it goes outside of the district, if the other building in Washington, D.C. even recognizes Hispanic Heritage Month.
Can I just recognize the people who are here? So thank you so much to Bria, Cardozo, Mary Reed, United We Dream, Carlos Rosario, and Czech to the representatives who are here. And also, I just also want to recognize LAYC, who couldn't send anyone today, but who, of course, you know, they have been a real rock especially in Ward 1, but throughout the city in providing all of those things I talked about: support, advocacy, education, and opportunities. 30% of their staff are alumni, and I think that speaks volumes to the kind of organization that it is. So,
thank you. Thank you all so much for coming. In just a moment, we're all going to come down and join you and have some photos. First, let me go to our second resolution. Sorry. First, we'll vote on the resolution. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? The ayes have it. I'd like to say I'll get the hang of it, but it's been a while. Okay. The second resolution recognizes the hard work and dedication of Linda Ryden in creating the Peace of Mind program for pre-K through grade 5 students. Ms. Ryden has been a peace teacher at Lafayette Elementary for over 15 years, but the program extends beyond those in her classroom, and we are grateful to her for all she does. I'd like to turn to Jack Jacobson from Ward 2 for the motion.
I'd like to move the motion on.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion having been properly moved and seconded, Mr. Hayworth, will you read the resolution into the record?
State Board of Education Ceremonial Resolution recognizing Peace Teacher Linda Ryden, CR 19-20. Whereas Linda Ryden, a resident of Ward 3 in Washington, D.C., brings a passion for teaching peace and over 25 years of teaching experience to her work with children and adults. Whereas Ms. Ryden graduated with a bachelor's degree in political science and government from Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. Whereas she is the founder, creator, and curriculum author of the Peace of Mind program, a research-based social and emotional learning program that teaches mindfulness, kindness, and conflict resolution to students in pre-K through grade 5. Whereas since 2003, she has been a full-time peace teacher at Lafayette Elementary School, where she teaches peace classes to more than 900 children in grades 1 through 5 every week, and leads Peace Club, Kaleidoscope Kids, and Mindful Mentors activities. Whereas during the 2019-2020 school year, the Peace of Mind program is supporting at least 9 district public schools with its resources. Whereas through Ms. Ryden's work and the Peace of Mind program, hundreds of district children are better able to recognize and manage their emotions, practice kindness and empathy, and solve conflicts peacefully. Now therefore be it resolved that on the 18th day of September in the year 2019, the District of Columbia State Board of Education honors Ms. Ryden as a tireless advocate for focus on the social and emotional needs of the district's children as a committed teacher, author, speaker, and writer. Be it further resolved that the State Board thanks Ms. Ryden for her service to district students and families.
Thank you. Is there discussion on the resolution? Mr. Jacobson?
Thank you so much. When I heard of Ms. Ryden's story and important work that she was doing, I was incredibly impressed. This is such important work, starting out teaching our youngest children values that we all hold dear and values that are lost in many of our national leaders right now, including kindness. I'm just so pleased and hope you continue the work and continue to support these children who we hope to leave our future to. Thank you.
Others? Seeing no further discussion, the vote is on approval of Ceremonial Resolution 1920. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? The ayes have it. All right, we are now going to take a 5-minute recess to present the resolutions. We will present the resolutions in order. Once your name is called by our staff, please meet the board members in front of the witness table. We will start with the community members in attendance who are here to accept the ceremonial resolution for National Hispanic Heritage Month. Recess.
Go on up to the well right here, and we'll get everyone started. Anyone in the audience who's here for National Hispanic Heritage Month, we're going to start right here at the front. Can we bring in folks here? We are after, because everyone will be seated in place already. It was in the email. So, Emily, if we can get you guys to move forward just a little bit, we need to move these chairs up just a little bit so folks can stand behind them. Thank you.
For any folks that would like me to take a picture, I'm happy to do so.
Thank you. Excellent. All right. So if we get Ruth, Marcus, I need you in the front 2 chairs, please. And we need 2 representatives from the groups to sit in the chairs opposite them. And then board members behind, please. Equally distributed. If you folks could come over here to this side, that would be good. Sorry. So 2 representatives from whoever group, we dream. There's 1, and then Ashley's on the other chair. Perfect. So if we can crowd around, come in. In further on the other side. There you go. Just make sure everyone's in the photo.
We are going to need it a little bit tighter. So maybe Jack, and I don't know your name, sir, maybe 2 rows ish, yeah. That would be great. Thank you so much. All right. I'm going to start with this one. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1,
Her, him, yes, her. She's a 4-year-old. Laughing. Already turned.
You know who I always think of in that? Do you remember David Tansey?
Yeah.
Who used to come all the time. He now has 2 kids. And he's
Out of everything.
I mean, he's still super active, but,
Right.
but very hard.
Karen
I
got
know.
her boot off
Yeah.
on Monday.
Thank you, everybody. The State Board welcomes public participation in activities under our authority, and at every public meeting, we begin with testimony from public witnesses on education-related matters. Your comments will become part of our official record. If you're a member of the public and would like to speak at a future public meeting, please contact our staff by email at sboe@dc.gov or by calling 202-741-0888. Tonight we have 2 public witnesses. The witnesses have provided written comments for the record. They are available on our website. As I call your name, please come down to the table. Our panel will be Laura Fuchs, Washington Teachers Union Executive Board, and Ronald Thompson Jr., Ward 8 resident.
Ron's on his way, like 2 stops away, so maybe he'll make it in time.
If he doesn't make it, can we open it at the very end?
Just leave it there.
You can move it closer.
Hello, you have 3 minutes to speak this evening. Please note that you must use your microphone. Your mic is already on. The light on the table will be green for the first 2.5 minutes. It will turn yellow for the last 30 seconds and will turn red after 3 minutes have elapsed. Please begin when you are ready.
All right. Hello. I'm Laura Fuchs, and I'm a chair of the Washington Teachers Union Committee on Political Education. And I'm going to just be talking more about budget transparency. So we said it before, and clearly have to say it again. Budgets are moral documents and are the foundation upon which our education programming is built. It is simply not possible to achieve our ambitious and important equity goals without equitable funding. And as we've seen time and time again, equity cannot be achieved if left up solely to a mayor. It must be inclusive of the stakeholders and those who are actually implementing the policy, and we cannot operate in the dark. The ESSA task force proposal has the right idea. We need to make sure the budgetary decisions that are being made at all of our LEAs are rooted in the same language and definitions so that we can make adequate comparisons. This will encourage greater transparency overall and allow us as a system to analyze where the money is going. If the City Council takes a page out of the proposals made by the task force, we may be able to better see if special education and English language learner supplements from the federal government are supplementing and not supplanting schools' comprehensive staffing in DCPS, and we may be able to be sure that they're being spent appropriately in charter LEAs. We need a clear definition of what makes a central office employee, and then we need to hold DCPS to the law of only spending 5% or less on those activities. DCPS is at least 3 times above the legal limit right now. We need more information on external contracts. I went through a spreadsheet submitted to the council, and it took hours of time to organize the information into useful pieces, and I found many contracts that ostensibly did the same thing, but were purchased from different offices from different companies. Either they were actually doing the same thing, or the reporting requirements are so general that we don't actually know what is being paid for. For charters, there's even less data, and it's even harder to find. I also want to caution in the future discussions around budgets against assuming a buzzword like student-based budgeting will automatically fix our problems. Many systems like Chicago are trying to move to our model that DCPS uses because it actually provides more stability and makes school budgets less dependent on enrollment numbers. The problem we have in DC public schools is that DCPS is not following its own policies. If we have a model of reporting our budgeting spending that is similar and using similar definitions across LEAs, I think that could limit a lot of the shenanigans that go on at our local schools. And we are in a position through the report card to do that. So I hope we continue to push that recommendation from the ESSA task force. Well, it's not here
We can take questions from the board members. Is there someone that would like to ask a question? Emily?
Hi, nice to see you. Can you say a little bit more about the last thing you just said, how the report card can help us do that?
So one of the committees on the task force was a budgeting committee, and it was made up of parents and people from PAVE, a couple school leaders, myself. I think Mr. Jacobson was on it. So we were talking a lot just about kind of what in that section that's going to be reporting on the schools and what they're spending per pupil. There is a lot of concern that because schools do receive federal funds to support their students, and they do receive at-risk funding, you know, weights, and they do receive these things, that it could look really good when it's not in fact the case. And that this was an opportunity to really start breaking down how schools are spending money. And if a school is doing a really great job and using their funds in a really efficient or innovative manner, it'd be great for other LEAs, schools, et cetera, to see how they're spending that money. You know, in broad picture, but like still using some similar definitions so we have an idea of where money's actually going, so that we could either mimic it if it's working, or if a school is maybe like, hey, why is that administrative cost so ridiculous, that we could do the same thing kind of on that end, being like, why you shouldn't be spending, you know, 25% on a central office cost that's just not reasonable, which DCPS would have to own up to had we actually had standard definitions. So I just think it's kind of a tool to at least get started talking about definitions, talking about what is central office, what is, you know, school-based, what, you know, is acceptable for a contract, a private contract, and how should we report that, and maybe actually saying what the contract's going to instead of just some weird title that has almost no meaning. But you notice $60,000 went there, so you're like, huh, I'd like to know, is that, you know, useful, and how can I even find that out? You know, as an employee, I can't find it out, let alone as a public member. So I think, you know, it can't solve all our problems, but it can begin a discussion, and we maybe can start to get some data that we could start comparing local schools and kind of what's going on, and since we already have to do it for some of the federal requirements, and kind of go from there.
Thank you.
I'm going to break from our questions and ask our other public witness, Mr. Thompson, to speak. And you have 3 minutes. I think you know the rules. You have 3 minutes to speak. Please note that you must use your mic. Your mic is on. The light on the table will be green for the first 2.5 minutes. Will turn yellow for the last 30 seconds, and then will turn red after 3 minutes have elapsed. Please begin when you are ready.
Thank you, Representative Wattenberg, members of the board. I haven't spoken here in quite some time, but the last time I was here, I was asking for the board to speak out in favor of increased transparency as it relates to all of our schools, but in particular our public charter schools. And since that time, I've had conversations with members of the board through various mediums, and I think some of the responses to those in favor of increased transparency for all of our public schools, but again, in particular, our public charter schools have been particularly charged to the extent of alleging that individuals have been engaging in racist or racially charged behavior. And as an African American former recent DCPS graduate, I don't think it's racist or racially charged or racially insensitive to ask that any public school receiving public dollars be subjected to the same standards of transparency and record keeping that the schools that I attended, that were predominantly attended by African Americans and continue to be predominantly attended by African Americans. I don't find any individual who asks for the same standards applied to the schools that were, for most of my lifetime, operated and run by African Americans, the classrooms occupied by African American teachers. I don't find it particularly racist to consider, to call for, across the board, the same transparency standards. And for the members of this board and this body, I ask you in your interactions with the public, and for advocates like myself, a former student from DCPS, an uncle to a young girl who attends a public charter school in the district, the uncle of a recent graduate of a public charter school, all of whom are African American. I do not consider myself to be racist. I do not consider myself to be acting and advocating against the interests of my young niece or any person. I have a cousin with disabilities who attends St. Coletta that Representative Gasoi and Sutter visited, I believe, earlier this year. I don't consider applying the same standards of transparency or being critical of any institution rightfully is racist. And I ask the members of this board to not criticize members of the advocacy community wrongly and charge folks with the stain of racism simply because you do not agree. That is not good for discourse, it's not good for our children, and it is not good for the health of this public school system. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, now we're going to continue with comments. Comments from anybody? I'm going to make a comment, but okay. Mr. Batchelor?
Thank you both for joining us this evening. I think both of the issues you talked about in terms of how we better support economically our schools and our student communities that are furthest behind, excuse me, and also the access to information, how families are able to shape their students' educational experiences are both important, and I think things that that many members individually look forward to advocating for now that the council is back from its recess. But those are conversations, and rightfully so, that needed to be started now. As you all know, as members of the advocacy community, once one budget cycle ends, the other one quickly begins. And so if we're going to fundamentally change the way we support our schools and accomplish a lot of those recommendations that were included in the ESSA task force report, now is really the time to take action to make sure that we fundamentally shift systems in favor of more equitably supporting our student communities and our families that have been left furthest behind. So I appreciate you all for coming this evening and really making sure that we as advocates for public education and for families across the city keep that at the top of our mind as we begin to engage in both the work that this board has left to do, much work that this board has to do, as well as much of the advocacy that many members participate in on a daily basis. So thank you for joining us.
Mr. O'Leary?
I'd like to just mention that there is a transparency hearing on the 2nd of October. Now, what Mr. Thompson was talking about, transparency, and what Ms. Fuchs was talking about as far as equity, I think can go together, hand in hand. And if that transparency, and I welcome the members of the community to please testify at those hearings, all you have to do is get in touch with the Education Committee and sign up to testify, because the only way that these things will change is through transparency. All right? And I think that it's, I appreciate both of you bringing up those two different sides, which could be addressed at that hearing.
Other comments? So I want to ask one question. Ms. Fuchs, you talked about the DCPS's staffing model, which has come in for a lot of criticism, but you're saying that it has also can have very good impact when it's followed. And I wonder if you could say something about when and how it doesn't get followed, so people can sort of think about this in terms of their own schools.
Sure. So, I mean, the concept of the comprehensive staffing model is this idea that there should be a bare minimum that all schools should have that are open, no matter how few students they have. They should have a principal, they should have a librarian, they should have social workers and counselors. These are things that even if a school starts to lose students, which would arguably then suggest they're going to lose funds, that they should still receive this funding no matter what, no matter how low it gets. If the school's still open, they have these services they can provide. So it is based on students in terms of what band you fall in, how many things you then get within that comprehensive staffing model. The issue has been that when there are supplements that come from the federal government, that come from the council, that oftentimes what we're finding is that, and this is a DCPS issue, but that DC Public Schools will remove one of the required positions. You just won't get it. And instead they will use at-risk funds, or they will use special education funds, or they will use ELL funds to fund the position. So it's still there, but it's not being funded with comprehensive staffing funds. And so a school, instead of having their baseline and then getting to add on top of it based on the population they serve, that the icing is kind of becoming part of the cake. The cake's been cut
So
into.
schools are getting the full complement that they're promised under the comprehensive staffing model, but in a way it's supplement, it's supplant, not supplement, that
Yeah.
they're getting it, but it's being paid for by the other,
Right.
by the other
So
monies.
arguably, the school should have even more than they currently have. So yes, they're meeting the basic requirements of the comprehensive staffing model, but they really should have that plus 2, 3, possibly even 4 positions at some schools that are really facing kind of huge cuts to their comprehensive staffing model. So I think the issue tends to come in that it is confusing, but it doesn't have to be. Like, we're making a choice as a system to not properly implement our.
I'm going to cut you off because I want to ask a quick question and I'm going to run out of time. So you, I believe, are at a school that lost a lot of funds last year?
Yep.
And how did that translate into positions that were lost?
I mean, we probably ended up losing 6. We did get 2 back at the last council hearing.
And then the last thing I want to ask you is just, can you say for the audience when the hearing is? So that if people want to
Hearing for-
testify at the DC Council Ed Committee hearing on transparency, it is when?
Yep, it's October 2nd.
October 2nd?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you both for coming. Anybody else before? Okay. Thank you very much for coming. Okay, DC Science Assessment. The State Board of Ed adopted the Next Generation Science Standards in December 2013. Since then, the Office of the State Superintendent of Education has been working to develop an assessment to ensure that the standards are being utilized effectively in district classrooms. DC Science is the assessment that has been developed with the assistance of science teachers across the city. Teachers were also involved in determining how students would be scored on DC Science. And tonight, we are lucky to have 5 of those teachers here to talk about their experience and the importance of strong science standards and instruction. So our guests are coming to the table. I have Ramona Hutchins, science teacher from Dunbar. Alicia Shaw, DCPS High School STEM professional learning designer. Kamellia Keogh, science teacher at McKinley Middle School. And Sarah Riggen, science teacher at Cap City Middle School. Do you guys have an order in which you want to go, or should I have a list here and I'll just do that and if you have no order. Okay, the first person I have is Ramona Hutchins.
Okay, that's me. So good evening. It is my pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Ramona Hutchins. I serve as the Project Lead the Way Engineering, Physics, and Computer Science teacher at Dunbar High School with DC Public Schools. I have been a teacher for 19 years, and this is my 4th year with DCPS. I wanted to talk a little bit about the transitioning to the NGSS science standards and our approach to science instruction and student learning as a result of the adoption of these standards. It has truly helped to transform the way in which our students learn science and how we teach science. Students are no longer just the passive learners of science content information and development of science and engineering practices and skills. Now students are the owners and the doers in that learning process, and the teacher now has gone from being the sage on the stage, just merely disseminating information to children, to now just to facilitators and providers of meaningful and relevant learning experiences and project-based learning for our students to learn science at a deeper level, where now they are able to apply those science concepts and skills to other areas of their lives and translate that into meaningful projects in the community and in furthering their education. And NGSS standard lesson follows a 5E instructional model approach where we engage students, we allow them to explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. The evaluation phase is where the DC Science assessment comes into play. Now, I'm not saying that the DC Science test is the all-in-all of the evaluation process. As you know, a good teacher does balanced assessments all throughout science instruction. There are multiple formative assessments that we apply during a lesson or a unit. The NGSS standards allow us to be able to do that, where we merge science and engineering practices, disciplinary core ideas, and cross-cutting concepts as we teach our students. As a district, we have adopted multiple, curriculums in order to make sure that we are adequately preparing our students for a test of this nature. We presently are using STEM scopes, which is definitely aligned to NGSS and the 5E instructional model. I teach physics. STEM scopes is my primary curriculum go-to. Also, Project Lead the Way is an extraordinary STEM curriculum that is definitely aligned to NGSS and this new way of teaching where students are actively engaged. We also are still using Discovery Science Textbook and FOSS kits and things like that. I participated in the process of the development of this test. I was blessed to be part of the November and December content item review sessions. I was also invited to participate in the performance level descriptors development over the summer, and recently the performance level setting that we just did a couple of weeks ago. The development of this test, I feel, was very carefully and thoroughly thought out, had a lot of teacher input. Our thoughts, opinions, and experiences were definitely brought to the table and played an integral role in the development of this assessment and the way in which it will be scored. So, do you have any questions for me? I can read this entire statement. It's very lengthy. I'm a talkative person, but I would like to open it up to you to ask me questions.
We're going to hear from all of you and then do the Q&A.
Okay.
And I didn't say up front, and I should have, each of you has 5 minutes insofar as you want to use that, and then afterwards. So you have 59 seconds left if you're interested.
Oh, okay. So let's see here where I would like to go. Okay.
54.
The way in which NGSS science instruction differs from the traditional and now outdated method of teaching is that it moves our students and teachers away from lectures, worksheets, and passive learning. NGSS makes the learning more relevant and meaningful to our students. It creates a facilitator teacher, an active student learner, and deepens the learning experiences for our students. I went into a description of a lesson on magnetism and how students would move from just bookwork and worksheets learning about magnets to actually being given a piece of steel, aluminum, and copper and asked to categorize them, magnetic versus non-magnetic, and having them make predictions. So now students are touching materials, they're making predictions, metacognition is taking place, and then we give the student a magnet and have them test to see which metal is attracted to a magnet. And then we talk about the why, with the teacher never truly giving the students the answers, but allowing students to learn the answers through exploration and research. And that is one concrete example that I can give of how NGSS-aligned instruction and learning is very different from pre-NGSS science learning and instruction.
Thank you. And, okay, thank you very much. You're welcome. I have next Alicia Shaw, DCPS High School STEM Professional Learning Designer. And let me just say, what you've got there, and I didn't say this earlier, is for your 5 minutes. The timer is set. When you're 30 seconds out, I think the yellow will go on. Yes. And then when you're done, it'll be red, and then you should end. We'll give you a few seconds to wrap up. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Alicia Shaw, and I'm the Manager of Secondary Science for DC Public Schools. there was a title change along the way. So I've been the STEM professional learning developer, but now I'm manager of secondary science. So it's good to be with you this evening to discuss the importance of strong statewide content standards in science. I hope that this conversation will provide important context to you before you vote to approve cut scores for the DC Science Assessment. In my role as manager of secondary science, some of my duties include providing coaching to school-based science teacher leaders to improve their ability to plan and implement professional learning seminars to their colleagues in their schools. I also support teachers and school administrators with implementing and supervising the implementation of curricula and assessments that our DCPS provided and created. The Next Generation Science Standard sets a high bar for science instruction that all students deserve. The NGSS were developed in collaboration with states and other stakeholders in science, science education, higher education, and industry to show what science education should look like in the 21st century. The NGSS focus on helping students to use science to make sense of phenomena in a natural and designed world, and to use engineering to solve problems. The NGSS was developed to make it clear that all students need to have direct opportunities to engage in science and engineering, to investigate their questions and design solutions to the problems that they care about. I participated in the development of the DC Science Assessment in several ways. I participated in several of the assessment design process meetings and in the performance level setting meetings. Throughout both of these experiences, I collaborated with both district level colleagues and teachers to norm on what we see in classrooms, how well teachers have transitioned to implementing the NGSS, and our shared vision for science education in the district. Thank you for hosting this important conversation, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Next, Kamellia Keough, did I do that right?
Yes, Kamellia.
Good, thank you.
Hi, members of the State Board of Education. My name is Kamellia, and since 2010, I've taught 7th and 8th grade science in DC public schools, most recently at McKinley Middle School, which has a STEM focus. It attracts a lot of students across the district, but one of the challenges I face each and every year is students new to our community have a varying variety of exposure to science content and science skills, and these are 7th and 8th graders. Some have in-depth experience with science, while some have had none at all. And these are students who've expressed to me that they want to be surgeons, veterinarians, but they haven't had or touched a scalpel or microscope in their previous years. So tonight I wanted to focus on my remarks on the approach to science education. So like Ramona, really with NGSS, and my philosophy is hands-on learning, making it as meaningful as possible for the students so that they can really truly internalize what they are learning. Every class that they go to, they're reading, they're writing, they're taking notes, they're taking a quiz, they're taking a test, whereas this is allowing students to really stretch their creativity. And despite their lack of science skills, anybody can experience a phenomena, whether it's new or whether it's something they've experienced before. So within the last 10 years of working with DCPS, I've seen the transition from just the straight DC science standards to NGSS. It's something that I've had to relearn after just learning how to teach in general. But now I'm learning a whole new different way of learning. I think back to when I was a child and touching things, taking caterpillars and hiding them in my room and seeing what's going to happen to them. Did not make my mother happy, but I at least can think about that was meaningful to me. I can remember that from when I was 5 years old. Students now still come back to me and say, I remember when we did X, Y, and Z in your classroom. You trusted us to be able to touch these materials and to explore with them and to play with them with certain parameters and to discover, truly understand the meaning of discovery. And with NGSS, it develops this level of rigor. And from looking at 5th grade, since we've adopted in 2013, I've had some students who've had previous experiences with engineering standards, so I can actually see how they're layering what they've learned prior And it really just gives so much rise to innovation and these real-world experiences. For example, one of the lessons that I've taught my students, instead of just teaching them this is potential energy, it increases with height. This is kinetic energy, it increases with mass. You give kids a bunch of marbles. Here's a tube, play with it. See what happens when you raise it higher. See what happens. That requires no skill other than natural curiosity of the students. And then you take that and you, using NGSS, you allow the students to put themselves in a position of an engineer. How can you design a roller coaster? These are real world things as opposed to this is potential energy. Prior to NGSS, I can already envision the one student just sitting in the back corner like, why are we doing this? There's no purpose to this. How is this relevant to me? But I'm giving them tools. You can do this. It's okay if you lack these skills in reading, writing, math, even science skills. You can sit and you can play. So one of the greatest needs I feel that we need in our science community is just an appreciation for science education. While we can say that it's appreciated, but from the chancellor to instructional coaches to principals to schools to families, it does not get the same attention as math and ELA. There's such a push. There's instructional support within the classrooms. For a small school like mine, I don't have an instructional coach. I go out and I seek these professional development opportunities. And luckily, because of the adoption of NGSS, I've searched out PDs across the nation, and I'm able to have some common language between other educators and be able to utilize and share these resources. And part of my role that I've played an active role with OSSI and DC Central Office is supporting science teachers across the district. And a lot of their hesitation with adopting NGSS is the lack of resources, both at their school. Although the district level provides it, we only meet 4 times a year. We're emailing throughout. This is a lot of teacher supporting teachers as well because it varies from school to school. I've been fortunate enough that my principal has allowed me to participate in the DC Science Assessment reviews more than one occasion, whereas other teachers have had almost none. So I feel like if we focus and place an emphasis on science education, it can get the respect that it needs and really transform our students, even the ones who feel like they are stuck in a rut, not having the math and science skills. They can be scientists if they just are given the confidence in the science classroom. And I see I have my red light, so I'm stopped. Thank you.
Sarah Riggen.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Riggen, and I've been teaching in the district for 13 years. I'm currently a 6th grade science teacher at Capital City, and I've also worked at Oyster Adams, Wilson High School, and Seed Public Charter School. It's really nice to be here with you because we all know each other. We've been working on this science test and science education for a long time, so it's nice to know that we're moving to the next step in the process. One thing we were asked to do in preparation for this meeting was to think of a concrete example of a lesson before NGSS and now. And you've heard a couple of examples already from Ramona and Cami. In, I believe, a Google Drive that maybe you'll have access to, is that true? Yes. I did provide an actual lesson so that you could look through it if you wanted. And it's about light and why we see different colors. And so everyone in the middle school physical science cohort for DCPS, we all were exposed to this lesson. It's NGSS aligned. Essentially, you're looking at M&Ms with only red light or only green light and only blue light. And what you see is pretty fascinating. Like, it's virtually impossible to sort these M&Ms. And so it's a very compelling, engaging thing that students do. You may have done that prior to NGSS, but the difference is then what the students are required to do after that experience. There's one particular tool that I learned of through the DCPS PDs called STEM Teaching Tool number 41, and it's the way that we're encouraged to incorporate the cross-cutting concept component of NGSS, and in my opinion, it's what makes the instruction go from good to amazing, that one tool, because after having the experience, you can, as the teacher, say, okay, I want to focus on patterns, and it will give you 10, 15 sentence stem or question stems that many of which will be relevant to that particular activity. And so in that folder, if you do care to look at something that, microscopic, I highlighted in the most recent version of the lesson that I gave my own students the components that came from that document that really, it makes the kids have to work, have to think real hard, but in a very clear and explicit way. Beyond that, I feel like my colleagues have really expressed many of the same things I was going to say, so I don't necessarily want to go through it all. I will echo that science instruction, it has to be given fair time. Where I'm coming from, actually, over the 6 years that I was there, science instruction was elevated big time at Oyster Adams, so that now all the way 4th through 8th grade, it's departmentalized. Students have a science block every day. 4th through 8th grade, that's equal time to the other classes. Where I'm now at Capital City, science is taught 4 days a week for 48 minutes. Wednesdays, they don't have science at all. They have all these extra math blocks. So, and then as a district course chair in DCPS, I heard all kinds of scenarios that my colleagues were facing where they only teach science half of the year, or their expertise is in physics, but they're teaching earth science, which is a whole nother issue. But yeah, and then the curriculum piece, as Ramona mentioned, I mean, Project Lead the Way is amazing, but not all DCPS students have access to that. I think STEM Scopes is a step in the right direction. Discovery Ed Tech Book was like an online textbook, which is not going to get you to where this DC Science Assessment test is requiring students to get. And I guess, yeah, the last thing would just be the role I played with the DC Science test. I was only a part of the range finding, which was toward the end, determining what score a given answer should receive. And I was really happy to have a chance to finally see that test. We were all given the opportunity to see the previous science test that was supposed to be testing NGSS, and I was horrified. I didn't look at it for a long time, and then when I did, I was horrified at how bad the questions were. And so I was really happy to see that this test has come a long way, and it's a really good test, but it's a hard test. And so if our kids are going to be good at that, they're going to need a lot of instruction, a lot of good instruction, and teachers who know the content really well. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. All right, we're going to,
One more person.
oh,
Okay.
No.
Sorry, I counted wrong.
thank you.
I'm
It's
so
usually,
on
it's
spot.
usually me that's wrong, so thank you. Okay. Each of the board members who's interested in asking can have 5 minutes. As you may know, often we go into multiple rounds. We're going to try not to do that tonight because I know all of you have to get up early. So we're going to use our own self-discipline to try to keep ourselves to 3-minute rounds and just one. So, 3. They get 5, we get 3 because there's more of us. All right. Is there someone that would like to?
Do you want me to call around?
Oh, okay. All right. John
Mr.
Paul's
Batchelor?
I'll pass, thank you.
Dr. O'Leary?
Yes, I have 4 questions. I'm so impressed with your enthusiasm about this, and I think that y'all are the cohort that the school systems need to push this forward. But I have short questions for each, or one for each of you. Ms. Hutchins, how does the process leading up to the citywide assessment work with the standards?
So the very first thing that I believe OSSI did was contract Pearson to write a bank of questions. The questions were pulled from the performance expectations that is aligned under NGSS. So for example, one cluster of questions is about 6 questions in the set. Those 6 questions are based on 2 performance expectations. Within a performance expectation, you have science and engineering practices, disciplinary core ideas, and cross-cutting concepts. So questions were developed to be 3D, 3D meaning that the question addresses some sort of science and engineering practice, whether that's research, whether that's a level of exploration, or coming up with like a design brief for an engineering problem. And then the DCI, disciplinary core idea, what is the content that we're aiming for the child to learn within this question or demonstrate their learning of? And then last but not least, cross-cutting concepts, for example, matter and energy and how they interact with each other, patterns, and things of that regard. Finding a way to merge those three ideologies into a question. So Pearson provided a stimulus, which is the phenomenon, and that's what we use when we teach phenomenon-based lessons. And then questions were built based on that phenomenon, requiring students to go back into a phenomenon, whether they're looking at a figure, a graph, or a data set, in order to answer questions that were aligned to NGSS, disciplinary core ideas, science and engineering practices, and cross-cutting concepts. We reviewed those content items to ensure that they were in fact aligned and that the rigor was there and that they were void of any mistakes and ambiguity and biases. Upon completing that component of designing this test, we looked at performance level descriptors. What should students be able to do at level 2, 3, and 4 for each of the performance expectations in NGSS? From there, we designed integrated statements. Those integrated statements were what we use for the performance level setting. What should a borderline level 2, 3, and 4 student be able to do? And from there, we use the students' P-scores, the statistics from the test that they actually just took this past April, in order to help us have those important conversations and determine what should the cut scores be. And then we took, I think, 3 rounds of voting, and then we looked at that data and decided from the median what those scores should be.
Thank you, Ms. Hines.
Can I just say one second? As an English teacher, I should have understood that I wouldn't get to my other questions when I'm asking knowledgeable science people about science.
Mr. O'Sullivan?
Yes. This question, I guess, is directed towards you. Can I pronounce it Ms. Kia? Okay. Okay. So you mentioned a lack of resources when implementing NGSS. Do you mind expounding upon that thought or some of the challenges you faced?
Yeah, a lot of the lack of resources comes from just examples and professional development on how to roll out, how to dissect. For teachers that I've supported, they've been teaching one way their entire lives, straight out of the textbook, answer the question, label the diagram. But to get examples, try to come up with a phenomena or an experience that students may or may not have ever seen before, and to develop questions that are very rigorous. Because a lot of times you're thinking, okay, rote memorization, let me ask you a question, what is PE, calculate PE, what is that? How do you take that and twist that into something that is engineering aligned? So the resources that I'm specifically speaking to are just resources with regards to lesson plans or examples, something to look at. Looking at the DC Science Assessment, I've been fortunate enough to see it. I did not realize the level of rigor and what my students should be able to do until I saw those assessments. So once I started seeing, I started flipping my classroom, asking those higher order questions, because I did not realize that at a middle school level, they should be able to do this. As I thought about it, I could rephrase this question to look like that. So resources that I'm looking for, textbooks. We got rid of textbooks several years ago, and we went to an online textbook. Unfortunately, many of our students don't have access to the internet outside of their homes, outside of the school or the library. So how are they going to get access to that textbook at home? So those are things that I need. We've been fortunate with DC Central Office. I can't speak to charter schools. We have been shipped resources in terms of consumables. So I will get marbles. I do have cups and some lesson plans, but it's still work in progress. And I would like more understanding. You can give me a whole lesson plan, but how do I do this? What does this look like in the classroom? How do I engage the student who can read on a 3rd grade level? How do I engage students who are reading on a high school level in a middle school classroom with just these materials sitting in front of me?
Thank you.
Mr. Jacobson. Thank you. Ashley.
I actually have a question for you guys. Talking about your testimony, I was very interested in the examples that Ms. Hutchins and Ms. Riggen used when talking about active learning as opposed to passive. And my question posed to the teachers here is, especially Ms. Riggen's, how you incorporate the science into your other classes to make sure that students are getting the science curriculum to be able to have the experience needed for the tests.
I embed it completely, but I will say I start assuming that students know very little, and with with hands-on play, basically, that's going to get them experiences that we can then dissect. I still do lecture notes, to make sure that everyone's on the same page about given content. But then that is like hand in hand, day after day, like lecture, stations, activity, lab, assessment on where they are, then centers more at their level. It's like just a really dynamic process. And maybe that's part of why it's been such a struggle for so long to get it district-wide, because it's an art, really, more than a curriculum.
Anything you would like to add, Ms. Hutchins? I loved your concrete example about magnetism. If you have any other ideas or examples that you would like to talk about, please.
Well, I have a rather eclectic experience in the district. I'm just coming from Henley Elementary in Southeast DC, Ward 8, where I was the STEM specials teacher for 3 years. I taught the pre-K through 5th graders, and all grade levels receive Project Lead the Way, in addition to other traditional science lessons. And we found a way as a school to embed science instruction into our master schedule, where teachers, no matter which subject they primarily taught, they were required to stop, drop everything, and do STEM for at least 30 to 45 minutes a day. My principal utilized me as kind of like a pseudo-science coach, where I would go in half a day and work with teachers and coach them into how to work certain skills, science and engineering practices into a Eureka math lesson. So yes, we're measuring, but now let's look at how we can apply those measurements to how we do take measurements in a laboratory environment during an experiment when we're doing data collection. How do we move graphing from just something that's so static to something more relevant and applicable to collecting data in a science classroom? So we tried to find various ways to do that. Now I am part of an engineering team of teachers that's all we do all day long, and we work with a math team to make sure that our students are understanding the cross-curricular connections.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Sutter?
Hi. Thank you all so much for your testimony tonight. So a few things the board is working on right now are issues of teacher retention and teacher professionalism, issues of making sure that students receive a well-rounded education, including instruction in the content areas in the early grades, and then contemplating a review and revision of the social studies standards. So you all provided so many pieces of food for thought that intersect with all of that. And the one I want to ask you to dig in on is, it sounds like you've created your own professional community of teachers and continued learning for yourselves in the absence of a formal structure. Can you talk with us a little bit about what an ideal setup would be to take the beautiful community you've built and give you time or structures that were built into a district or a system to support the work you've done? Like, what would you do if you had your way?
One thing I've thought a lot about like, there's got to be teachers in the district who are doing it great and who have so many great ideas, and and so why are they in a bubble? And why can't that person or those people or the couple of people per grade or content area, like, take a year leave, like, get together, pool all their resources, find the best of everything that they've got, and then really give good PD to the teachers? Because for DCPS as a course chair, we met 3 or 4 times on something that was very, scripted from the district, but oftentimes there were half of the room every time was brand new teachers or people whose, like I said, expertise was in something that wasn't physics or chemistry, myself included. Like, I'm a geology and environmental science person who taught physical science for 12 years, so I learned a lot on the fly. So to get a couple of experts who can really, like, in a summer crash course sort of situation, give everything that they've got, so that what Cammie's talking about, you have lots of examples, lots of phenomena, design challenges, because they must be out there. I mean, I know that I have a fair amount, but I don't have all the answers either, for just my one topic. So, like, I think that would be really powerful.
Coming from a school system in Georgia called Gwinnett County, I was part of a team of teachers who were the PLC leaders for each of the science content areas. One of my critiques of DCPS is that there has to be a level of uniformity across the board. If we're going to have a conversation about access and equity with science instruction, we have to, I'm not going to say benchmark testing because that's an outdated, archaic term, but there has to be some level of common assessments across the board throughout, not just at the end of the 5th grade year, the 8th grade year, and the biology year, but there needs to be something maybe at the end of each advisory period. A new teacher coming into the district or into a school should receive a C&I folder, that's a curriculum and instruction folder, with all these wonderful resources that are NGSS aligned for that teacher, for each unit that we're teaching. I think that that would be very helpful, and that would address some of these holes and gaps in our children's education. As a mom, I am very pleased with the fact that in the PG County schools that my children attend, that my child can go from one school to another school within the same quarter of the school year, and they're on the exact same unit. That is not the case in DCPS, and I think that a change is needed.
Thank you all. If you have other thoughts, we're happy to hear them over email.
Mr. Parker.
Thank you all for sharing tonight. I will say what I love more than having Ward 5 teachers, representatives, teachers coming and talking about instruction, which I think we don't talk nearly enough about at this body in the city, and that is welcomed conversation. I'm going to couple this in 2 themes, and I'm running against the clock. So the first is for Ms. Hutchins and Ms. Keogh. Both of you talked about your experience teaching before the standards and after the standards, and Ms. Keogh in particular, you talked about how you studied the assessment to kind of deepen your own understanding about the expectations at a given grade level. This body is looking to do research examining how instruction across the city, in particular in literacy, is meeting the expectations of our standards. I would love if both of you can share briefly on things that we should examine, even though it's not necessarily science, but how things we should examine in instruction, but also the ways in which teachers might benefit from being supported in learning new standards given the transition, if they were teaching before, if that makes sense. And then Ms. Shaw and Ms. Riggen, both of you talked about time, in one sense from a district level providing time, and then Ms. Riggen, you talked about your experience at Oyster Adams. If you could talk about what allowed for that extra time at Oyster Adams. And then Ms. Shaw, if you can talk about exactly your role. Are you a singular person supporting science professionals across the district, or is there a team, and how does that look relative to time? So I'll start over here with Ms.
Okay, my part was, okay, I know you said before NGSS, Post
And
NGSS.
afterwards, yes. So as we're going into our research, what should we be looking for as we examine the level of instruction and how it's meeting grade level standards, as well as what areas of support might teachers benefit, having gone from teaching before a new set of standards to now?
So vertical alignment has always been one of my greatest critiques. If the teachers in pre-K through second grade are teaching STEM, then the teachers in third through fifth will have a much easier time preparing their children for this DC science test. For the fifth grader, they have to master standards in third, fourth, and fifth grade in order to be successful on this test. So the vertical alignment is definitely needed. As a high school teacher now, it was my hope that the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers had prepared their students accordingly.
Thanks, Ms. Keel.
Can you repeat my part?
What ways in which, how could a teacher benefit from coaching and support having transitioned to new standards?
How to dissect and read the standards. What does it mean? What does it look like for students to be able to cite evidence or construct a graph to demonstrate that this experiment had increased the temperature? What does this look like? How do we dissect this? What skills do students need? What skills are they coming from? So that was my big challenge of going from how do students know what exothermic and endothermic reactions are? That was the basic standard. I could teach that, I can do an experiment with it, but NGSS wants students to push that, cite evidence, be able to construct something and design or propose a design and critique a design. So looking at those standards and what does that mean? What does this actually look like? And working with the DC Science Assessment, I got close, but I didn't realize how in-depth it actually, what the students had to do. And with NGSS, there is an incorporation of Common Core standards. I have no training in Common Core standards, so I don't know what the students should know at this point in the 8th grade. What do they need to know in terms of math skills and ELA skills? I can reach out to those teachers, but I don't have that PD support because through our DC central office and our district-wide PDs, I'm learning about phenomena. I'm anchoring and looking at assessments. I really don't know what that instruction looks like to teach math and ELA and twist it all into a science standard. I'm finding that I'm creating my own reading articles based on what my knowledge is. I'm pulling 5 or 6 different articles just to teach students about, say, what is matter, and creating questions, context clues, because that's what I think they should know through the ELA Common Core standards.
Thank you.
Mr. Parker's time has expired. May I suggest as well that additional questions can be sent via email through us? Dr. Gasoi.
Thank you. I will actually pick up one of your questions about why at Adams, I can't remember who it was now. Okay. Why at Adams you had that time, was it something, just the school leader, or is there something else that you're finding? And this is really for all of you, I guess. What are the obstacles to being able to have ample time to teach science? And is it, just that it's not a tested subject, which is about to be, so will that change it? Or are there other issues as well, which I think you've touched on some of them. But so that's one. And then the other is just, I love hearing about, the integration or really focusing on play and curiosity and, phenomena and all of that. I'm wondering about real world learning, real world application, and like, for instance, is there integration of like problem solving? And for instance, things like climate change, is that part of it?
Regarding Oyster Adams and time, so for 4th and 5th grade, initially they had a long block that was math science, but it pretty much was math. And so the parent community was pretty vocal about wanting more science, and that was why, and the teachers also appreciated being able to just focus on one or the other as opposed to both. So that's all. I mean, the time is there in the schedule, I think, for everyone probably, but 4th and 5th grade it goes mainly to math.
Just to address a bit more about the time, really oftentimes it comes down to school leadership. where science will be scheduled in a school's program. However, students are pulled out during that time for remediation for math or reading, or the time is actually spent, it's called science, but they're working on math or reading during that time. So what we find is that students aren't getting, the NGSS is a spiral curriculum, it's spiral standards rather. So what students are learning K-12 is building up on each other all the way through. So students aren't getting the amount of time and the experiences that they should be getting K-2 and then 3-5 and then in middle school and then in high school. So then when they're tested at these tested grade levels, or when they get to high school, and then everyone does take high school science courses for graduation, a lot of times we find our students having just a lot of background knowledge that needs to be filled because they didn't have experiences prior to. So having that push, having that support from parents, from community members, from everyone saying that you must schedule time for science and you must use that time to teach science, especially with the way the standards are and what they require students to do. They need that thorough experience. They can't get where we want them to get just getting science, you know, during those tested years. They won't be able to achieve what we want them to achieve.
And I just wanted to add to that. We do have the time at our school. We have science every day. My concern and my obstacle is that we teach in 49 minutes. With middle school kids, it takes 10 minutes just to get them to settle down and to calm down, and then to present new tools to them. That's already another 10 minutes right there. To actually do meaningful science and what we want them to do, to design, test, retest, that takes at least 45 minutes to an hour, and it comes down to leadership to decide how much time in one block that they will allocate specifically to science.
Madam President.
Thanks. So we've talked a lot about a number of the obstacles. I want to focus on the time, and I want to focus on the elementary school. And you all have talked a little bit about how it's been done well in a couple of places. But my question is, if you want a child to do well at the 5th grade, and if you want them to enter middle school so they're capable of doing well in middle school, how much time should they be spending in science starting in, I don't know, pre-KK? You tell me. How many minutes, hours a day or a week should they be getting, in your judgment, to learn what they need to learn?
In my judgment, anywhere between 55 to 60 minutes a day. It should be given its fair amount of time, just as all the other subjects.
And why isn't it getting that amount of time now? I mean, why isn't it being treated fairly relative to other subjects?
The PARC test and the impact tool has, I believe, this is in my opinion, okay, has created this culture of my IVA matters, my impact, value added for impact matters more than anything else. So if I know as a teacher that this is a very large chunk, I think 35% of a teacher's impact score comes from the PARC testing results. PARC testing—
Which are not science, is what you're saying?
It's not science. It's math, and it's the reading test. And I believe that the science test will be part of a school's report card. So maybe some principals will push more because they care about their star rating. However, for teacher buy-in, it would have to literally become a part of the impact score in some way, shape, or form, whether that's observations, which is another major component of a teacher's impact score, or task goals, or CSC. But just as a teacher at Henley Elementary for 3 years, it was very frustrating for me pushing in the afternoon when STEM was supposed to be that 30-minute block, and I'd go in to support STEM instruction, and a teacher would say to me, "I'm sorry, my Eureka math lesson is running over. We're just not going to do STEM today." And again, putting my parent hat on, that's not fair to someone's child.
I want to ask a question. You say it's going to be on the report card, and I just want to check that is true, that the score will be on, but it's not going to be part of the star rating. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is not part of the star rating. It will be reported publicly and included on the report card.
I see.
So one question I have, again, in terms of creating some sort of transparency for the parents about what's going on, and I also this idea that kids who are in having some sort of extra pull-out support are being pulled out of science, and I know often they're pulled out of social studies, and which also gets very little time. So if we want to create some transparency on that for parents. So one thought that people had talked about here a few years ago when we talked initially about the report cards was to put on the report card sort of again, I'm talking about elementary school, the school schedule, sort of the master schedule, so that it was sort of public and transparent how much time was going to these subjects. And I realize on every single day, every single principal or teacher might not adhere to it, but if it was there, there's a transparency to it, and if it's not being adhered to, it becomes a conversation. Does that make sense to you? Is that yeah?
Absolutely. I think that that's fair, and I think that that would definitely deter people from just tossing out science instruction and making it optional. It needs to be a non-negotiable. So if that's what it takes, I'm for it.
And what Ramona had mentioned earlier was just this consistency and uniformity across the district. If you're saying that if my child is in first grade and they transfer at the end of September and go to another elementary school, they're still on the plant cycle. They're still able to seamlessly be able to transition between one school and another. So part of that transparency could be, what is the curriculum looking like? What are students going to be learning? What is the topic for each month, or what are the goals of science and social studies? And I think that would help to encourage teachers to adhere to this pacing guide so that they're not skipping over science.
All right, thank you very much. I've gone over, but that's because I've taken the time from my neighbor here who passed, but I'm not going to take it all, but thank you. Okay, I know there's a lot more questions. I have a lot more questions. I think I am going to email somebody about this issue that you're talking about the coherence across the schools. I'm very interested in that. So, but with that, we know you guys have to wake up early, and we really, really appreciate it. And thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, the appointment of our new Chief Student Advocate. Since its creation, the Office of the Student Advocate has provided continually expanded service and assistance to district families. When Dan Davis joined the OSA in 2016, he was the first full-time staff person other than the office's chief. As such, his hiring effectively doubled the OSA's capacity. It was clear early that his impact would be felt throughout the city. He helped create the OSA's go-to guide, giving parents and families a single place to find resources, and more recently, the comprehensive student discipline guide. He's made presentations and held training events across the city to ensure that families know their rights when navigating the education system. And I think it is fair to say that he really he was instrumental in helping Faith to make that Office of the Student Advocate what it is today. And we appreciated so much Faith's work, and we are so happy to recommend to the board that he be appointed tonight for a 5-year term as the Chief Student Advocate. I will turn to Vice President and Chair of the Administrative Committee, Marcus Batchelor, for a motion.
Madam President, so moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion having been properly moved and seconded, the resolution will be read into the record. Mr. Hayworth?
State Board of Education resolution to appoint Dan Davis as Chief Student Advocate, SR 19-9. Whereas the DC State Board of Education has authority over the appointment of the Chief Student Advocate under the Office of the Student Advocate Establishment Act of 2013, effective February 22, 2014, as part of the Parent and Student Empowerment Act of 2013. Whereas Section 202C of the Act notes that the State Board must appoint a new Chief Student Advocate to fill the remainder of a vacant term within 75 days of the occurrence of the vacancy, whereas the position of Chief Student Advocate became vacant on April 27, 2019, whereas the State Board of Education appointed Dan Davis as interim Chief Student Advocate to ensure that the vital work of the Office of the Student Advocate continued uninterrupted. Whereas, as a student advocate and the interim chief student advocate, Mr. Davis demonstrated a deep commitment to equity and to serving the needs of all families in the District of Columbia. And whereas Mr. Davis has extensive experience related to the position of chief student advocate, including experience in outreach, advocacy, social work, law, or counseling, and management experience that demonstrates the ability to hire and supervise qualified staff as required by DC Official Code 38-372. Now therefore be it resolved that the DC State Board of Education appoints Dan Davis to the position of Chief Student Advocate for a term of 5 years to begin on October 1st, 2019.
Thank you. Is there discussion?
I would like to say something.
Mr. Batchelor and then Ms. Gasoi.
Sure. Thank you, Madam President. One, I want to thank Dan for committing to serve the residents and families of the District of Columbia as Chief Student Advocate for the next 5 years. I think all of us understand how vitally important your work is and how vitally important you touching families and supporting them every single day is to making sure that this education system works for them, especially for families that have been so historically left behind. And I think, and I expressed this to my colleagues at the working session, that I think we have an exceptionally qualified candidate in Dan, someone who has helped to our president's point, really bring this office into what it is today and is laying out a clear vision for its next phase of success and excellence. And so we want to thank Dan and the entire team who for sure has endured what I think is probably the first round of transition since the office's establishment, as well as the Office of the Ombudsman, and really being patient and working with both the older but also newer members of the board as we collectively talked about how we could better work together and better serve the residents of the district. But I'm excited to establish some continuity in the office and to give our families, most importantly, the surety that someone like Dan is going to be in their corner every single day to make sure that they have the resources and support that they need. So I thank Dan, I thank the Office of the Student Advocate and all who work there, and my colleagues for your indulgence as we work through this transition. So thank you, and hopefully, I guess in the next minute or so, congratulations.
Well, it can't be a minute because Emily wants to speak.
I just want to say how much I have appreciated your generosity in sharing your time and your knowledge, and that I'm looking forward to continuing to learn from you and to work with you. And thank you for all the collaboration that you have been. You're really open to spontaneity. I'll say that. When I invite you to a meeting, you tend to come, or you came and spoke to my class, and the depth of knowledge that you bring is really impressive. So I just want to thank you. I'm really looking forward to working with you.
I would, like to thank Mr. Davis for your hard work over the last almost year now since I've been sworn in, and really not only getting aligned with this board's work, but really setting a model for the work that your office is doing, carrying the baton of Ms. Gibson-Hubbard, who established the office. We've had conversations about the district's homeless population, students with special needs, which has really highlighted how this isn't just work, but this is something you're deeply passionate and concerned about, which I think is necessary for a public servant. And I just would like to commend you again for the amount of time, effort, dedication that you've put in thus far. And I welcome you to push this body to ensure that we are more aligned and that we are really honoring the work of your office. And so on behalf of the families of Ward 5 and district parents alike, thank you for all that you and your office do every day. And I am looking forward to working with you over the next few years.
Yes, I'd like to, for us to give Mr. Davis a standing ovation. We wanted to get that on the recording.
may need to do it again after we actually vote him in. Okay, seeing no further discussion, the motion is on approval of SR 19-9, the Chief Student Advocate appointment. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the ayes have it, and again, I'm standing again because I think it's great. I'm really happy to have you here. Thanks again. All right. At our July public meeting, the State Board heard from Ward 6 President Joel Spangenberg about the district's low registration rates for the selective service system. Although the national average is nearly 92%, in the district the rate is only 51%. And the reason this is a problem is that young men who do not register for selective service are barred from accessing a number of federal programs, including financial aid for college or workforce training programs. This inability to access services and funding can have a massive impact on students' futures. The State Board asked its staff to recommend changes to rules or regulations to assist in increasing registration rates. And I am pleased that we have this resolution before us tonight. Is there a motion on the resolution?
I'd so move.
Second?
Second.
The motion having been properly moved and seconded, the resolution will be read into the record. Mr. Hayworth?
State Board of Education resolution on the importance of selective service registration, SR 19-10. Whereas the Selective Service Act of 1941 established the current selective service system, an independent civilian-run government agency whose mission is to register men and maintain a system that, when authorized by the President and Congress, rapidly provides personnel in a fair and equitable manner while managing an alternative service program for conscientious objectors. Whereas the Selective Service would provide personnel to the military by conducting a draft using a list of young men's names gathered through the Selective Service registration process. A draft has not occurred since 1973. Whereas virtually all men living in the United States are required by law to register with Selective Service within 30 days of their 18th birthday. Whereas in the unlikely event of a return to conscription, individuals who object to serving in the armed forces on moral or religious grounds are able to request classification as a conscientious objector and assignment to non-combatant roles or alternative service. Whereas if a young man fails to register before he turns 26, he can permanently lose access to all federally funded job training programs along with many state and locally funded programs, all federal government jobs along with many state, county, and municipal jobs, and with private employers that require security clearance as an employment requirement, all federal and many state college loans and grants, timely granting of U.S. citizenship for men who arrive in the United States prior to their 26th birthday. Whereas registration can be done online at www.sss.gov by printing the form and sending it to the Selective Service System, applying for a driver's license and identification in many states, while completing a free application for federal student aid form and other convenient methods. Whereas the District of Columbia has one of the lowest registration rates in the country, with only 51% of 18 to 25-year-old men completing this requirement, which is well under the approximately 90% national average. Whereas over a recent 10-year period, 2007 to 2016, young men in the district may have lost an estimated $4.6 million in federal benefits from student aid and work training programs because they failed to register with the Selective Service System as required by federal law. And whereas DC Code 50-1401.015A requires the District of Columbia Department of Motor Vehicles to submit registration information to the Selective Service System when eligible citizens or residents apply for operators' permits or identification cards. Now therefore be it resolved that the State Board is concerned that many young men in the District of Columbia are potentially missing out on millions of dollars of available federal funding by not registering with the Selective Service System. Be it further resolved that the State Board advises that the Mayor develop a public outreach program to increase registration by young men in the District of Columbia utilizing public advertising, the public education system, and government agencies interacting with families and students to encourage registration. Be it further resolved that the State Board recommends that the Council of the District of Columbia work with the Mayor to develop legislation that would extend opt-out or automatic registration opportunities to other programs that involve young men eligible to register, including, but not limited to, voter registration, the Marion S. Berry Summer Youth Employment Program, the Marion Berry Youth Leadership Institute, the DC Tuition Assistance Grant Program. identification and credential programs separate from existing programs, justice-involved assistance programs under the purview of the Department of Corrections, programs that assist men in completing their high school diploma or equivalent, and training and benefits programs at district agencies. Be it further resolved that the State Board encourages the members of its Student Advisory Committee and its student representatives to promote registration in the Selective Service System in District of Columbia high schools, and be it finally resolved that the State Board directs its staff to have registrations available at all public meetings of the State Board.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the resolution?
I'd like
Ms. Sutter?
Madam President, thank you. I just want to thank again Joel Spangenberg, the Ward 6 resident who brought this to the board's attention. I appreciated his testimony this summer, and I'm glad that we were able to raise awareness of this and put this resolution on the docket for our approval so that we make sure that all throughout the district young men are aware of this requirement and aware of what they stand to lose for failing to do so. So I'm glad we can take part in that education, and I thank Mr. Spangenberg for bringing it to our attention.
And I thank you for bringing it to the board's attention.
I think it's also important that we've expanded the outreach in the resolution itself, because this is very, very important for the young men of the District of Columbia to understand the consequences of not registering for selective service can really affect their lives forever.
Any other comments, discussion? Okay, seeing no further discussion, the motion is on approval of SR 1910, Selective Service Registration. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed, no.
Nay.
The ayes and nays, the ayes have it and the motion carries. Okay, the next item is the official designation of Dr. Emily Gasoi to serve as the district's delegate to the Delegate Assembly of the National Association of State Boards of Ed. As I mentioned earlier, the NASBE conference is happening next month, and a number of us will be traveling to Omaha, Nebraska to learn from our colleagues and share information about our work. With that, I move that the State Board designate Emily Gasoi as our 2019 NASBE delegate. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion on the appointment? Well, I think it's great. That's my discussion. I'll meet you in Omaha. Okay. Seeing no further discussion, the vote is on approval of Emily Gasoi as our 2019 NASBE delegate. All in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion carries. And I believe last, is this last? Or no, it's last on the agenda. The final item on the initial agenda is the third in a progression of items related to the priorities of the State Board. In March, we adopted a list of priorities, and in July, we adopted plans, in June? We adopted plans of action related to those priorities. The action items were developed by working groups that included any board members who wanted to participate in public meetings. Those groups met regularly throughout the spring. Tonight, we're going to be establishing committees for these priorities as they move into their implementation stage. They will take the place of the working groups. They will convene as necessary to oversee relevant work in their areas and will report on their work to the full board. Is there a motion on the resolution?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
The motion having been properly moved and seconded, the resolution will be read into the record. Mr. Hayworth?
State Board of Education resolution on the establishment of committees, SR 19-11. Whereas the DC State Board of Education is committed to facilitating research aimed at increasing public awareness and understanding of the quality of public education in the District of Columbia and supporting its improvement, especially for our most vulnerable students. Whereas the State Board has adopted resolutions establishing its priorities and how it intends to implement them. Whereas initial discussions on these priorities took place in informal working groups that were open to the public. And whereas the State Board believes it appropriate to formalize these working groups as committees with chairs. Now therefore be it resolved that the State Board establishes the following committees. Teacher Retention Committee, chaired by Fraser O'Leary, Ward 4 Representative, with Emily Gasoi, Zachary Parker, Karen Williams, Ruth Wattenberg, and Marcus Batchelor. Well-Rounded Education Committee, co-chaired by Emily Gasoi, Ward 1 Representative, and Zachary Parker, Ward 5 Representative, with Jessica Sutter, Ruth Wattenberg, and Marcus Batchelor. Social Studies Standards Committee, chaired by Jessica Sutter, Ward 6 Representative, with Zachary Parker, Karen Williams, Ruth Wattenberg, and Marcus Batchelor. Research Committee, chaired by Ruth Wattenberg, Ward 3 Representative, with Emily Gasoi, Jessica Sutter, Zachary Parker, and Marcus Batchelor. Be it further resolved that all meetings of the above committees will be open to the public in accordance with the requirements of the Open Meetings Act, and be it further resolved that the committee chairs shall convene meetings as necessary and are directed to report on their activities monthly at the State Board working session. Be it finally resolved that these committees will continue their work until the strategic objectives are accomplished, or until December 31st, 2020, whichever is sooner.
I have an initial friendly amendment, which is, I guess on line 29, we drop Jack Jacobson, who is a member and has been of the research committee from the beginning. Is there anybody else who was on a committee and wants to stay in a committee and whose name was dropped? So I didn't go over these. Everybody else, it's all okay?
For clarification, are you saying to add his name or to
Yes.
drop his name?
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
To add.
Assuming that's okay with Jack.
Yes,
Thank you.
and it has to be okay with the mover and second as well.
I was the second.
It's okay with me.
We're good, we're good. All right, anything else on that? Okay.
I did have one quick question.
Yeah.
If other members that aren't on committees would like to be placed on them, like Ms. Carter.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's okay.
MacLeay.
Understood.
Could that occur?
Yes, absolutely. In
Thank
fact,
you.
Anybody can be on it, and anybody can come, even if you're not on it, if there's something that you want to be part of, because we've made them, they're all going to be open meetings, so they're all going to be able to handle whoever comes. Thank you for that, Jack. Okay, any other discussion, conversation? Okay. Seeing no further discussion, the motion is on approval of SR 1911, establishment of committees. All those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? The motion carries. I want to note that the Teacher Retention Committee, somebody's on their toes, will be having its first meeting tomorrow, September 19th at 10:30 a.m. at the SBOE office. Others should, as they find it appropriate, let us know when there will be meetings, and we'll make sure that it's set up for open meetings.
Clarification.
Yeah.
Is that in compliance with the Open Meetings Act? Has the press release gone out? I think that you need.
It does comply with meetings because as of right now, the meeting has been moved on our website, which is the official notice, and has been, the original meeting was on Friday, and it has been moved, and that it complies with the Open Meetings Act.
Okay. I'd hope that these committees would not strive for minimal compliance, but we'd rather really try to schedule these meetings when the public can be fully informed and there's adequate notice provided. Thank you.
I appreciate that, and let me just say, on the when we've had the working groups, that has absolutely happened since with the one exception at the very beginning, because they were regularly on the schedule. This is the first time we're doing it this way, and I agree they should be done in advance, and all chairs, including myself, are on notice, and John Paul will help keep us to that. Thank you very much.
Question. On the Selective Service Act, you read that Selective Service Act of 1941. Is it 1948?
It is 1948.
Okay, great.
Okay, new business. Are there any announcements or comments from members before we adjourn? And this should be and will be a regular part of our meeting, so people have something to raise. Okay. All right. Before we close, I want to extend a welcome to our newest State Board of Ed fellow, Sarah Arrington. Sarah joined us on Monday, and we are glad to have her on the team. We expect to work her very hard, and she will learn a lot. With no further business before the State Board, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it, and this public meeting of the State Board is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.